I decided to make this video after I received a request about creating texture mods that go further than simple color adjustments. The software I use for this process is as follows. UModel, for asset extraction. Blender, for model preparation. Note that the PSK add-on for Blender is required to import models from this game. Adobe Photoshop, for channel extraction and tweaks. Substance Painter, for texturing the model. And Unreal Engine version 4.27. So, let's begin. First, I open and direct UModel to the game content. The game content is found in the Packs folder. Now I input the game engine version, along with the platform. In this case, that's Unreal Engine 4.27, on the PC platform. Now I can see all of the game content. I find the weapon I wish to export. Most of the weapon assets have subfolders for their models, while the textures usually sit in the main folder as you see here. You can open the texture or model to inspect it further. Just try not to press the escape key here as it will close the entire program. Use the Open Package option to go back instead. You can select individual items to export, but in this case, I export the whole weapon folder. I ensure that textures are set to TGA uncompressed. After that, I create a main folder for everything related to this specific weapon mod. Properly organized folders go a long way here. I use the main folder I created as the location for UModel to export to. The exported content contains everything involved with this specific weapon, including its folder path. You may notice here that there are extra folders aside from the weapon I chose to export. Weapon assets in ReadyOrNot share some files with each other. That is what is shown here. Inside my exported weapon folder are all of its components. In my case, I only require the model and the textures. The file names of assets for this game do not often follow a consistent format, so reading the file name carefully is the best way to find what you require. In my case, I want the model of the gun and the magazine. This is because I like to combine these two models to make the texturing process easier. Moving over to Blender, I use the PSK add-on to import the gun and magazine models to the scene. My goal here is to separate the mesh into parts that I may wish to use Substance Painter's geometry masking feature with. ReadyOrNot weapon models have vertex group data which can be used to quickly select certain parts of the mesh, as you can see me doing here. You can really do as you wish at this point. The only rule here is that you must not change the UV mapping of the model in any way. It needs to be the same as the version of the model present in the game. Once I have finished separating the parts one wanted, I reposition the magazine roughly where it would normally sit. I select all parts of the model and use the Shade Smooth option. This does make the model look very strange, but it's fine, I promise. Lastly, I export the model in the FBX model format, leaving all settings at their defaults. Now that I have the model set up and ready to go, I like to extract the packed bitmaps from the weapon textures extracted earlier. I want this video to be straight to the point, but I would like to explain channel packing as it will be very helpful to understand this. If you are already familiar with channel packing, use the timestamps within this video to skip ahead. Unreal Engine uses a physically based rendering setup. What this means, in a nutshell, is that additional grayscale image textures can be used to control certain properties of a given material. In these grayscale images, black is 0, and white is 1. The roughness of a surface can be controlled by this. A fully white roughness image texture will cause the material to be completely rough. In other words, not shiny at all. The exact same thing can be used for several different material properties within physically based rendering, such as opacity and metallic, just to name a few. So, how does this relate to channel packing? Well, as a digital image has 3 channels, red, green, and blue, each channel can accommodate a grayscale image. What channel packing is packing multiple grayscale images into one by adding them into separate channels of the image. In the case of ReadyOrNot, the red channel contains the ambient occlusion image, the green channel contains the roughness image, and the blue channel contains the metallic image. My goal in the upcoming step is to extract these images from each channel so I can use them easily within Substance Painter. Okay, time to extract the images. The file name gives me a clue as to which texture is the one I want. The texture named ORM, short for Occlusion Roughness Metallic, is what I am after. I take this texture into Photoshop and select the Channels panel. Here, I right-click the red channel and select the Duplicate Channel option. A new window appears, allowing me to send this to a new document. I name the document appropriately and confirm. This next step is very important. I select the image menu and change the mode to grayscale. If you do not do this to each channel you extract, you will not be able to save the image in the required format. I repeat this process for the remaining channels. Next, I select the TGA file format and save each image to a dedicated folder just for these images. Lastly, I grab the base color and normal map textures and put them with the images I just extracted so they are all together. I rename the other 2 texture files just for clarity. One more thing about the file names. Some assets will have different variations of these names. For example, the base color might be called albedo instead. In the case of this MPX weapon, the file names were simply given a single letter. Great, now I have extracted my chosen assets and prepared the models and textures. It's almost time for the creative part. Before that, I just need to set up the Substance Painter scene by importing the model I prepared, as well as importing and assigning the textures I prepared. I create a new project in Substance Painter and choose the Unreal Engine 4 template. I set the document resolution to 4K, then use the Select File option to select my prepared model from earlier and confirm the settings. Once the model is imported, I save the project before continuing. There are 2 reasons I do this. One is because saving your work is important, of course. The other is so that I can save a base version of the weapon and create modifications on a copy of it. Now, I use the Import Resources option to import the textures I have prepared. I assign each of them as a texture using the drop-down menu and save these textures to this project file. With the textures imported, I assign some of them in the texture set settings. First, the normal map. Can you see the difference that made? Normal maps are super powerful. Anyways, I also assign the ambient occlusion in this menu while I'm here. For the remaining textures, I create a fill layer and drag and drop each texture map into the appropriate slot. You may notice the weapon sights are still white. This is because this weapon model has two separate materials assigned to it. In most cases, the second material will be for the magazine, but in the case of this MPX, it was for the sights. I repeat the exact same process for the weapon sights texture set off camera. One more thing about the setup. Substance Painter has a texture baking option. This allows more information about the model to be created, which will allow certain texturing features to function properly. The textures exported from the model were likely created based on a much higher detail version of the model, so rebaking what is already there will only result in a lower quality texture. This is why when I select the Bake Mesh Maps option, I only check the curvature, position, and thickness options. With the substance scene fully set up, I can start with the fun part, texturing the asset. With my texturing complete, it is time for me to export the textures. I use the Export Textures option, which presents me with options for each texture set on the weapon. Note that it is in my best interest to stick to the resolutions used by the developers to ensure there is no game performance impact. In the case of weapon assets in this game, 4K resolution is used for the gun, and 2K is used for magazines. However, in the case of this MPX weapon, the whole thing is part of the 4K texture, and the sights have their own 1K texture set. These inconsistencies are something that simply has to be worked with in order to plan ahead. For example, I checked the resolution of the textures after I exported them from U-Model earlier. Anyways, with all of that in mind, I start by selecting the TGA format for the textures. Then, I ensure the size, or resolution, of each texture set is the same as what the developers used originally. One extra thing I like to do is change the normal map from 8 bits to 8 bits with dithering enabled. This can sometimes help with reflection artifacts. Moving over to the Output Templates panel, I select the Unreal Engine 4 Packed option. Remember the channel packing from earlier? This is going to repack those channels the way Unreal Engine wants it. I also remove the emissive texture output here, as this weapon does not have any emissive properties. With all of that out of the way, I hit Export. Once the textures have exported, I use the Open File Directory option to quickly locate the textures. I move my exported textures back over to my main folder for this weapon. Here, I make a new folder specifically for my new edited textures. Here comes the important part. I locate the original version of the textures again, and then copy and paste the names of the originals onto my new textures. This ensures that my new textures override the original textures. I take extra care to ensure I take the correct name for the base color, normal map, and so on. I want to show you an additional edit I make to the base color texture manually in Photoshop. Many of the weapon textures also contain the texture for the rounds which sit in the magazine. Due to the rounds not being present when I texture the weapon, the texture space that originally accommodates the rounds is overlaid. So, I take the original base color texture into Photoshop as well as my new base color from Substance Painter. It is usually fairly clear where the rounds are located on the texture, as their color is easily distinguishable from the rest of the weapon. I simply cut out this area on the base texture and overlay it onto my new version. Then, I flatten the image and save it as a TGA file replacing the old. Note that this same problem will occur all the same on the other texture maps. So doing this same process on the metallic texture is totally doable. it's time to cook the textures in Unreal Engine. I'm not sure why there are so many names like this. Cooking, baking, and so on. Anyways, I open Unreal Engine 4.27 and create a new blank project, saving it to an appropriate location. I name the project clearly so I know which project to open anytime I need to cook content for this game. Once the project is open, I simply drag all my new textures into the content panel. Note that Unreal Engine will try to detect what is and what is not a normal map texture. In my case, the packed image was mistakenly recognized as a normal map, so I revert the change. If this happens to you, and you happen to miss this notification, don't worry, you can still revert the change. To do this, select the texture, and change the compression settings option back to default DXT1 and hit save. Now, this next step is very important. If you do not do this, your packed image will not function as intended, likely leading to an overly shiny material in the game. I select the packed map textures and uncheck the sRGB option. Then, I hit save on this window. Lastly, I select Save All. Then I select Cook Content for Windows and wait for it to complete. With that done, I have to go and retrieve the cooked version of my textures. These are located in the Unreal Engine project's folder location. The cooked textures are buried several folders in here. First, I go to Saved, then Cooked, Windows No Editor, the name of your project, and finally Content. Here is my cooked textures. I disregard the 4 files at the top here. There is now 3 files for each of my textures. I simply select them all, cut them, and paste them back in my main folder, ready for the last step. Now, for the last part of this process. The folder I am now going to create is going to become the final pack file I can then place into the game and use. This folder requires a specific prefix. The prefix is as follows, and will be shown on screen. packchunk99-mods, followed by your chosen name. Then, ending the name with _1, _p as a side note. I have had mixed results with this ending to the folder name. Sometimes my mod would not load into the game without the _1, _p, but sometimes it works just fine without it. Unfortunately, I do not really know why this is the case. Anyways, with this weirdly named folder, I need to make a series of folders within it that mirror that of the folder path to my weapon in the game files. I start with a folder called Content. Then, in that folder, I make another called ReadyOrNot. Then again in that folder, I make another called Assets. In that folder, I add another called Weapons, and finally in that folder, I add a folder using the exact name of my chosen asset. To repeat that again, that's Content, ReadyOrNot, Assets, Weapons, and then the name of your asset. Note that these folder names are case sensitive, so be extra careful here. Lastly, I place the cooked textures inside of the weapon name folder. Really getting tired of saying the word folder. Note: if you do not know the exact name of your chosen asset, simply open UModel again and see the exact name of it. Now, I just need to create a batch file that can turn this whole pack chunk folder into a pack file. Creating a batch file is simple. Create a text file wherever you like. Then, rename the text file to unrealpack.bat while removing the previous .txt naming. Now I can right-click the batch file and choose to edit it. I paste in the code that I do not understand at all, and hit save. I will leave this code along with any other resources in the description of this video for you. I now need to place this batch file into my Unreal Engine 4.27 folder. Note that this is not your Unreal Engine project folder from earlier, but rather this is the main Unreal Engine installation location. I move through the folders as follows: Engine, Binaries, Win64. I place the batch file I made into this place. There are a lot of files here, so a good way to ensure the batch file is near the top for easy access: sort the folder by file type. I can now leave this batch file in here forever. I now open two instances of File Explorer side by side, one with my folder created earlier which contains the cooked content, and the other in the folder where the batch file lives. Now, I simply drag the pack chunk folder onto the batch file and release. The process will complete fairly quickly and will give you a pack file version of the folder. It's finally done. This pack file can now be added to the game like any other mod. I hope this video guides you well enough through the process of creating texture mods for weapons. See you around.